Thank you, Carla. Next speaker is Phil Thompson. Phil is an associate professor of political science and urban planning, and head of the Housing Community Economic Development Group at MIT. He's had many different positions in and out of government, and he has a recent book called Double Trouble: Black Mayors, Black Communities, and the Struggle for Deep Democracy. Phil?
No, thanks. That's not a recent book, but...
Oh, sorry. That's what it says here, recent book.
That's probably 10 years ago.
Okay. It's still worth reading.
Okay. I first want to say that I am really deeply honored by Mac's presence here today, and I just wanted him to know that he himself and the struggle that he helped lead has been a deep inspiration for many people of my generation, and we would not be who we are if not for him and those like him. I don't know where he is. I was taken by Mac's comments yesterday about digital technology and the revolution in technology, and since I'm at MIT, I thought I'd mention that. Marx once wrote that what would make workers revolutionary was not absolute deprivation, but they're seeing the contradiction between all the wonderful things that technology and productivity could do to improve the lives of people versus the way these things were held back by capitalist social relations. In other words, it was the hopeful and practical vision of the future that the left would embrace, and that would make workers want to change the system radically, not merely fighting defensive battles for existence. I see something like this every day at MIT. Young engineers and scientists are inventing things that they know could profoundly improve human life, and that is the motivation of many of them to invent and create these things. Yet they see their inventions either being squashed or gobbled up or misused by large corporations. Many of them are trying to organize their own movements for the liberation of technology, like the open source movement, but they have no connections to the labor movement or to movements of color. They tend to view labor unions as old-fashioned organizations opposed to both technology and revolutionary ideas. And I think there's some good reason for that. I see buses from China every day in the last 17 years full of tourists wanting to come and see technology and what's the future and engage. The first request we've had from a labor union to send a delegation to engage in this was a couple weeks ago, and it's from the UAW, Jimmy Settles, head of the Ford division of UAW, who said, I want to bring my leadership to MIT to really look and see what's being invented, and I want us to be in the forefront of that and help shape that, not just react to it. First time in 17 years I've seen a labor union want to do that. I want to say a couple of things before giving two substantive comments. One, technology itself doesn't destroy jobs. Politics and policy do. Second, the encroachment and domination of science and technology by big corporations today is as grave a threat to our future as were religious restrictions of science generations ago. It's a very serious thing. Third, with the right applications, digital technology can help make workers both more powerful and more prosperous. I want to give an example, a couple examples. So I was asked a few years ago by Local 1199 and NYSNA, Health Workers Union, Nurses Union in New York, to help them think through a strategy to deal with hospital closings. There had been 18 of them in New York State, and another one, Interfaith Medical Center in central Brooklyn, was threatened with closure. And both community and labor leaders wanted to, they were concerned about the loss of jobs. The state's argument was simply that these hospitals were losing a lot of money, and they had to save money. The hospital industry's response to the fiscal problem in these safety net hospitals was that the state should give them more money to build new operating rooms so they could do fancy high-tech heart surgeries, and more money to hire big-time surgeons who would attract more heart patients needing surgery, and that would improve the balance sheets of these hospitals. We argued that actually doing more heart surgeries is not going to save the state money, no matter how it improves the balance sheets of individual hospitals, because Medicaid and Medicare reimburse heart surgeries really well. But doing more heart surgeries is not going to save the state money, period, even if it helps individual hospitals. The only thing that can really save the state a lot of money is by keeping people out of the hospital in the first place and having fewer heart surgeries by improving community health. So we then went into, well, why are people so sick in central Brooklyn and these other poor neighborhoods in the first place? And it turns out, oh my God, it's stress. And what is the stress which causes hypertension and heart disease and diabetes, all these? The stress is unemployment, the stress is bad housing, the stress is poverty, the stress is violence, the stress is all these failing schools, all the things we know about lack of housing. And so we said to the state, if you address these things upstream, actually, that is the only way you're going to save money. So we proposed 12 initiatives, and last March, the governor, who's no leftist, committed $1.4 billion in these set of initiatives we fought for in central Brooklyn. And we're now in an experimental phase of trying to figure out what a innovative economic development approach would be, what an innovative housing, energy, education, food, and finance approach would be. And we're deep into all of that, what innovation in K through 12 STEM education would look like, what worker training, moving workers from hospitals into community care clinics so we could have primary care, what that would look like, and all kinds of ideas have been on the table. Land trust, worker co-ops, all kinds of things. The biggest issue we have, the elected officials are excited, the community leaders are excited, the state and city are actually trying to be helpful. The biggest challenge we have right now is trying to get the attention and support of labor leadership to really engage in this innovation and collaboration to think about the future and really engage in creating new ways in order to address these issues that I've talked about. The above connects, to me, with how we address the most important divide in US politics, and that is the racial divide. And if you look at voting patterns, living patterns, where people go to school, political and social attitudes, that is the biggest divide. The way that liberals and the left have typically addressed race is not radical enough and not practical enough. If I could use Bernie Sanders' campaign as an example. Bernie called for raising the minimum wage as a key demand. That isn't bad. It's not radical enough. The biggest problem in black communities, actually, it's not just bad jobs, it's no jobs. People coming out of prison, no jobs. Raising the minimum wage isn't radical enough. Bernie called for free college tuition. Again, that's not bad. But compared to whites, relatively few blacks are in college in the first place. And if you had free college tuition, that could actually widen the disparities between white kids who are graduating from college and black kids who never go to college and have to compete with them in the job market. Again, free college tuition isn't bad, it's just not radical enough to really address central problems in black communities. Housing, he didn't make a central issue at all. But white median income, household income in the US is 22 times black median household income in the US. And when it comes to housing markets, black people are being evicted in mass in Brooklyn, in DC, and all across the country. It's a burning issue. It wasn't even a key issue for that campaign. So it's not that Bernie was wrong, it just wasn't radical enough. And lastly, dealing with racial problems doesn't necessarily mean white workers have to pay higher taxes or that white workers won't benefit from addressing racial problems. This is where the battle over policy ideas and new technology and the battle for control over the economy comes in. For example, a black computational architect at MIT from Harlem has invented a way to design and build housing that uses no nails and no screws. Houses are broken down and fit together in pieces like Lego, held together by friction. These houses allow for a lot of innovative design and are 90% cheaper to build and 10 times stronger than conventional housing. All you need to build a house is a crowbar and a rubber mallet. This technology could create a lot of jobs for unemployed ex-felons in inner cities. It could make housing a lot more affordable, and at the same time, free up huge resources that could employ the building trades to build infrastructure to deal with climate change, which we're not doing. Of course, this assumes that this technology is put to popular use and that the savings will go to green infrastructure and union jobs. None of that will happen without a political battle. But it's a practical proposal. It's radical, but also practical, and a better housing solution than the conservatives can put up. In fact, HUD Secretary Ben Carson said, poverty is a state of mind. He's a conservative postmodernist. Labor could use big data to organize consumer purchasing groups to negotiate collective contracts for phone and internet service from whole communities. Black and white workers could be organized together to do this, and this could be a whole way, a new front of collective organizing on consumer fronts, and not just bargaining at the employer table, and part of those savings could be used to fund organizing, and this was a populist idea. 100 years ago, big data could make that easier, digital technology could make that easier, but I don't see labor like embracing these new kinds of organizing. Lastly, unity. Black communities, and this computational architect I mentioned included, have no problem uniting with the building trades and white workers to fight for this kind of vision which would benefit all of us. Black identity politics is not the problem here. The problem is that the building trades can't imagine teaming up with black communities for something like this. They are fawning all over Donald Trump, thrilled about building a wall to keep out immigrants, building pipelines to shore up the petrochemical industry. The white identity movement is the problem here. They and most other white workers who follow Trump, they're following the leadership of white supremacists. And to me, this is what the left and the labor movement has to fight. It's not racial particularism as the cause for division, because black advocates have never wanted to advocate our agenda as something separate and apart from that, from poor workers as something that can help everybody. I think in addition to our critique and condemnation of Trump, and this is the main point I want to say, we have to have a better vision, more radical vision, and more practical path to a better future than that which conservatives can produce. And the thing in our favor is the conservative agenda, the mainstream neoliberal agenda, is actually an impractical agenda. It's one that imperils all of our future, and we have to be both more visionary and more practical than they are.
Thank you, Phil.